Several new coaches around the SEC, and they have different hurdles to clear. We've gotten some questions about this, so instead of doing individuals, I'm just going to put them all in this one segment. Normally, when you get hired in this sport, it's because the previous guy failed. And he failed on such a spectacular level that he was fired, and then you were hired. Well, normally, obviously, what that means is you got a little bit of a rebuild that you inherit. That's not always the case. Like Lincoln Riley, when he took over at Oklahoma, there was no rebuild. Ryan Day, Ohio State, I think even Kirby Smart at Georgia took over great positions where there wasn't a huge rebuild that was needed. But most places there are. And we got 4 of them now in the SEC this year where, yeah, to varying degrees, there's a rebuild needed. We've got Brian Harson at Auburn, Shane Beamer at South Carolina, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, and Clark Lee at Vanderbilt that I wanted to briefly define the key hurdles for. And then we'll watch them this fall moving forward. Brian Harson at Auburn was the first one I wanted to talk about. What is the main hurdle? You can play right along with me here. What's the main hurdle that you think Brian Harson has at Auburn? Because to me, it's sort of twofold here. It's developing your pipelines, and that's mainly recruiting, and that's your network of contacts and the relationships with the high school scene down here. But also, you need to distinguish Auburn. So what's going to attract people to Auburn, what's going to attract recruits to Auburn is they either need to know you or they need to know Auburn. When I mentioned Brian Harson to a kid at Grayson High School or down in Thibodaux, Louisiana, or in Montgomery, Alabama, they need to either have a clear, distinguished, positive, ideally picture of you as a coach in their mind, or they need to readily identify Auburn football with fill in the blank, something good in the blank. Ideally, it would be both, but at least one or the other needs to be distinguished. Right now, Auburn's kind of anonymous. To a lot of high school kids, Auburn's kind of anonymous. They're that school that just fired their head coach, obviously. They're that school that used to specialize in hanging half 100 on people every weekend, but that fell by the wayside. And sometimes they were good defensively. Lately, they haven't even been all that great defensively. They just kind of are. They live in Alabama's shadow. Right now, they're living in Georgia's shadow. And so they hired a new coach. If I'm a recruit, I'm waiting. I'm seeing how they distinguish themselves. I don't know much about the coach. He came from Idaho. I think that's in Russia somewhere. So I'm going to wait. I need to either know something about the coach or something about the program. Those are the 2 big hurdles for Brian Harson. How about Shane Beamer at South Carolina? Different set of hurdles here, because I think Shane Beamer has to master what I call the 2-front approach. It's a 2-front battle right now. I've talked the same way about Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech. Shane Beamer inherits a worse roster situation than, for example, Brian Harson has at Auburn. So he's got a lot to rebuild behind the scenes. The inner wiring, he's got a lot to rebuild to where, even though they fully invested in him, he cannot give the fan base there and the administration an immediate return on investment. That's okay. That's understood. But yet you still need the positive energy. So what is the 2-front battle? Well, I just told you 1 front, but that's behind the curtain. All the inner wiring, all the building up of the roster, all the changing of the culture, that's behind the curtain. They don't want to hear about that. What you have to do on the other front, and that's the one you put out front on stage, is you have to master the art of marketing your program, not just to the fan base, but to recruits as well. Again, I would follow the Georgia Tech blueprint. I think Jeff Collins and company there in Atlanta, they've done a great job of this. They won 3 games last year. They won 3 games the year before. They're their 3rd year now. That staff's 3rd year in, but they still got a lot of energy because they've been working behind the scenes on front 1. And on front 2, they've been working right out in the open marketing Georgia Tech. They've done a really good job. Carolina would do good to follow that blueprint. Josh Heupel at Tennessee, you want to talk about a different hurdle or a different set of hurdles. They just got to keep as much water in the glass as possible. I've got the trusty college football playoff thermos here, and I want you to imagine I'm on one of those massage chairs, and the top is off of this thing, and we're massaging. It's like that Will Ferrell meme with the wine glass in hand. It's hard to keep water in the jar if you're constantly shaking like you're in an earthquake. Well, that's what Josh Heupel is tasked with doing right now. He's got water in the jar, and everything around him is shaking. And you're just trying to wait till the shaking ends, and it's ongoing, even as we speak. Let's see how much water we can keep in the jar. What that literally means is I can't have players continue to mass exodus their way out of here. I've also got to keep the administration on board. I've got to keep players on board. I've got to keep coaches on board. I got to keep everyone dialed in so that hopefully, and I choose my words carefully here because I don't want to give a false sense of hope, hopefully One day, not too far down the road, again, fingers crossed, we find out what our NCAA fate is, and then we check and see how much water's left and how much of a refill job we have on our hands. The worst part about this right now is just no one knows. Like, you assume something bad's coming. I assume something bad's coming. Everyone assumes something bad's coming. The only thing is we don't know when and we don't know how bad. So therefore, I don't even view Josh Heupel's real job as having even started yet. Right now, he's just in disaster mode. And then once we finally get an answer from Indianapolis sometime in the next decade, then we'll be set to go to work at Tennessee, and then we'll be set to define what the real hurdles are. Right now, it's just disaster mode. And finally, Clark Lee at Vanderbilt. This one's unique. Vanderbilt's always got unique hurdles. I think they've got to ID the positives of Vanderbilt, and they've got to master the evaluation and development aspects of their program. Now, they've put a premium on that evaluation and developmental aspect, and I think everyone says they do it, but Vanderbilt knows that's what they got to thrive on. If you were the head coach at Georgia, you would know that you can go get the best talent in the country. You don't have to be the absolute world's best evaluator, because you don't have to find diamonds in the rough. You just find the diamonds. And the diamonds, they're shiny. You can see a diamond. If it's 50 feet away on the ground, you can see a diamond. But if it's buried below the ground, you can't. So at Vanderbilt, they have to do it a little bit differently, obviously. But that's obvious. What do I mean by ID the positives of Vanderbilt? Well, what they have to do is they have to understand what the perception of Vanderbilt is. It's the 14th best program in the SEC, the 14th best job in the SEC, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know the reputation of Vanderbilt. Well, they know all that, and they know everyone feels that way. But the thing about Vanderbilt is there are a lot of positives, too. The mass public doesn't choose to talk about them. They don't have a vested interest in Vanderbilt. You do. And it's up to you to ID the positives of Vanderbilt and being associated with Vanderbilt and make sure that's what you market constantly. You got to push it out there every day. And they've started to do that. I think they've got a really firm grasp, based on the observations I've had so far of that staff, of what the limitations are, what is needed, and they've gone to work at it. And again, you got a guy in Clark Lee there who is unique in that he views Vanderbilt as a much, much better job, much more of a destination job than the normal guy would, because he's got, again, an emotional attachment to Vanderbilt. That's a really good thing. I mentioned Shane Beamer. He fits the same description at South Carolina. So those are some of the hurdles that these first-year SEC head coaches are looking to clear. Going to be a tough fall, going to be an interesting fall. Let me put it that way for some of these guys.